The rain was a relentless gray curtain over Chelsea, drowning the usual vibrance of the King's Road and turning the old Brompton Road into a slick, mirrored surface. Inside the Nam Long Le Shaker, the Vietnamese restaurant was warm, a humid bubble of lemongrass and ginger that fogged up the windows, blurring the red taillights of the traffic outside. For a few hours, it had been a sanctuary of normality for the young man in the corner booth. Prince William, fresh-faced and tanned from the dust and sun of a 4-month conservation trip in Africa, was back. He was surrounded by the easy laughter of old friends, the clink of glasses, the simple, unguarded joy of being just another 20-something catching up after a long time away. He had been painting fences and teaching English in the remote foothills of Lesotho, a world away from this, and a world where he was simply Wills. But here, in the heart of London, the chrysalis of his protected life was thin, and the paparazzi were always hungry. As the night wore on and the hour grew late, the inevitable happened. The word spread through the restaurant's staff, and then to the pack of photographers huddled under awnings across the street. The prince was leaving. The easy, relaxed atmosphere inside the restaurant began to curdle into a familiar tension for his security detail. The Royal Protection Officers, solid men in unremarkable suits, shifted their weight, their eyes scanning the rainy street. Their priority was singular: to get the prince from the door of the restaurant to the sanctuary of the waiting dark Range Rover without incident. The vehicle was double-parked, engine running, its windows dark and forbidding. I'll say it was a journey of perhaps 10 feet. But on a night like this, with the press pack desperate for a shot of the returning prince, it could feel like a mile through hostile territory. William said his final goodbyes, pulling on a dark jacket. The laughter from his friends followed him as he approached the door. A waiter rushed ahead to hold it open, letting in a gust of damp, cool air that cut through the restaurant's warmth. The moment the door swung open, the night erupted. The quiet street, previously just a wash of rain and sodium light, was suddenly a strobe-lit battlefield. Flash guns fired, popping like rapid artillery, bleaching the scene white for a fraction of a second before plunging it back into relative gloom. The photographers surged forward, a pack of taut, hungry figures jostling for position, and their cameras held aloft like weapons. "William! Over here, William! Just one, mate. Look this way. Wills, how was Africa?" The shouts were a cacophony, sharp and demanding. The prince stepped out, head slightly bowed against the rain and the intrusion, making for the open door of the Range Rover just a few feet away. His lead protection officer moved with him, a solid shield on his left. A second officer moved ahead to clear a path to the car door. The photographer with the best angle, the one who had been lurking closest to the vehicle, saw his shot disappearing. He made a split-second decision to push forward, ducking under the officer's arm, trying to get his lens parallel to the prince's face as he ducked into the car. The officer reacted on pure instinct. He pivoted, his body twisting to put himself between the prince and the threat, his arm shooting out to bundle the photographer aside. It was a hard, fast, and necessary move. But in the tangle of wet clothing and the awkward angle of the shove, physics took over. There was a sickening metallic clatter against the wet pavement, a sound that cut through the noise of the rain and the shouting. For a heart-stopping second, time seemed to freeze. On the glistening tarmac at the feet of the scrum lay the officer's Glock 9mm semi-automatic pistol. It had slipped from its concealed hip holster during the struggle, skidding across the wet ground like a discarded toy. For the protection officer, the world narrowed to that single object. His primary duty, the sanctity of the prince's life, was momentarily overshadowed by a catastrophic failure of protocol. And a loaded weapon, a firearm with the potential to end a life in an instant, was lying on a public street in London. His mind raced through the worst-case scenarios. A stray kick from a photographer could cause a discharge. A member of the public, or worse, someone with malicious intent, could snatch it up. He and his colleagues scrambled, their controlled professionalism replaced by a frantic, primal urgency. They dove to the ground, hands scrabbling on the wet asphalt, one of them managing to clamp his hand over the pistol just as another photographer, oblivious in his frenzy, nearly stepped on it. They retrieved the weapon, securing it quickly, their faces pale and tight. Through it all, the prince, shielded by another officer, slid into the back seat of the Range Rover. The door slammed shut, muffling the chaos. And as the car pulled away into the London night, William, unaware of the near catastrophe that had unfolded at his feet, likely just felt the familiar, wearying relief of another gauntlet run. The cost of his normality was always paid by someone else. The cold stone corridors of Windsor Castle had echoed with the sound of celebration for centuries. But few parties could have been as surreal as the one unfolding within its ancient walls on that balmy June night. It was the out-of-Africa-themed 21st birthday party for Prince William, and the state apartments had been transformed. The guest list was a glittering constellation of the young royals, aristocrats, and celebrities, all mingling under the gaze of portraits of monarchs long dead. The Queen, a small, bright figure in a golden ensemble, was present. So was the Prince of Wales. At the heart of the party, however, was the birthday boy himself, laughing with friends, the weight of his future temporarily lifted by music and merriment. Outside, in the castle's outer ward, a figure lurked in the shadows. Aaron Barshak, a 36-year-old comedian from London, was dressed for a role he had created for himself, the comedy terrorist. His costume was a masterpiece of absurdist provocation. He wore a flowing pink ball gown, a garish dress that billowed in the night breeze. On his feet were scuffed trainers, and on his face a full, bushy black beard of the type made infamous by Osama bin Laden, the world's most wanted man. He carried a small bag. In his mind, it was a prop. To anyone else, it could have been anything. He had a simple, audacious goal: to crash the most exclusive party in Britain. The security, and he later remarked, was unbelievably simple to bypass. He scaled a low embankment, used a conveniently placed tree to haul himself onto a 9-foot wall, and dropped down onto a terrace on the other side. He was inside the perimeter. He wandered through the shadows of the castle grounds, past the round tower, expecting at any moment to be caught in a searchlight or tackled by a guard with a dog. But there was nothing. The castle, with the entire royal family inside, was surprisingly porous. He found a door that led into the state apartments. As he walked through the ornate corridors, the sound of music and laughter grew louder. He passed a member of the castle staff who looked at the man in the pink dress and bin Laden beard and, incredibly, did nothing. He was inside the party. The scene was surreal. He mingled for a while, as a ghost at the feast, utterly incongruous, yet somehow invisible. Then, he saw his opportunity. On a small stage at the head of the hall, Prince William was making a speech. He was thanking his grandmother, the Queen, and his father for the wonderful party, his voice light and charming, his audience captivated. Barshak saw his moment. He stepped out of the crowd, walked calmly onto the stage, and gently took the microphone from the prince's hand. For a second, there was a vacuum of sound, a collective intake of breath from 350 guests. Then Barshak launched into his routine, a rambling, bizarre monologue. "I'm Osama bin Laden," he announced to the stunned and silent royals. "And I'm here to wish William a happy birthday." He told a few disjointed jokes, then turned to the bewildered prince. "We love you," he said. And then, before anyone could react, he leaned in and kissed the future king firmly on both cheeks. William, to his immense credit, simply stood there, a look of profound and utter bewilderment on his face. Later, trying to lighten the crushing tension, he would joke to friends, "I didn't know my brother could do an accent like that." The spell was finally broken. Security, whose absence had been the enabling factor for this madness, finally materialized. Barshak was grabbed by two large men and physically ejected from the hall. As he was led away through the kitchens, still in his pink dress, he was grinning. He had done it. He had walked into the heart of the British establishment and kissed the heir to the throne. The incident sparked a furious security review and national headlines. The comedy terrorist had exposed a flaw so profound it was terrifying. He had been carrying a bag, he pointed out. It could have been a bomb. He had stood feet from the Queen, from Charles, from William. The entire line of succession, the very heart of the nation's security, had been compromised by a man in a dress and a fake beard. The laughter that followed the story was tinged with a deep, chilling dread. The private sitting room in Adelaide Cottage, the Wales family's home on the Windsor estate, was bathed in the soft, gray light of a late winter afternoon. It was a room usually filled with the chaos of childhood, the forgotten toys, the half-finished drawings, the cheerful anarchy of 3 young lives. But today, a profound and unnatural silence had settled over it, thick as a blanket. Prince William sat on a low sofa, his tall frame hunched forward, his elbows on his knees. Across from him, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, was his wife, Catherine, her face pale but composed. Between them, on a smaller chair, sat their eldest, Prince George, his 10-year-old face a mixture of curiosity and the dawning apprehension that comes when adults are too quiet. Princess Charlotte, 8, leaned against her mother's leg, while 5-year-old Louis, too young to understand the gravity, simply wondered why everyone was so still. The previous weeks had been a blur of hospital visits, whispered phone calls, and a creeping, icy dread that had settled in William's stomach. What had started as a routine abdominal surgery had unfolded into something far more sinister. The tests had come back. Cancer. The word was a blunt instrument, as a club that shattered the fragile glass of their normal life. And it wasn't just Catherine. His father, the king, had also been diagnosed with a form of cancer, discovered during his own treatment for a benign prostate condition. The news had hit William like being hit by a bus, he would later tell a close friend. It was sudden, brutal, and completely disorienting. One moment life was normal, and the next, everything changed. He felt as if the rug had been pulled from beneath him, plunging him into a free fall of fear and helplessness. He was the linchpin, the future of the monarchy. But in that moment, he was just a husband and a son, terrified of losing the 2 people he loved most. Now came the hardest task: telling the children. Catherine had insisted they do it together, calmly, honestly, with love. As William looked at their faces, he felt a wave of emotion so powerful it threatened to capsize him. He had to be the rock. He had to be the future king his family needed. But inside, he was breaking. He thought of his mother, Diana, and the phone call that had brought his own world crashing down when he was just 15. He knew, with a piercing clarity, the before and after that was about to cleave his children's lives in 2. Catherine took a deep, steadying breath. She reached out and took George's hand, drawing him closer. In a voice that was gentle but unwavering, she began to explain. She told them that Mummy was ill, that she had poorly cells in her tummy that the doctors needed to get rid of. She used simple, child-friendly language, avoiding the terrifying C word. She told them she would have to go to hospital for a while and would be very tired, but that the doctors were the best in the world and were going to do everything they could to make her better. The most important thing, she stressed, looking each of them in the eye, was that they would be okay. She was going to be okay. They were a team, and they would get through this together. Charlotte's eyes filled with tears, and Catherine pulled her into a tight hug. Louis, picking up on the distress, buried his face in his mother's lap. George sat stoically, his young jaw tight, trying to process the information, the weight of being the eldest suddenly feeling much, much heavier. William moved from the sofa, kneeling on the floor to wrap his arms around them all, creating a human shield of love against the incoming storm. And in the days and weeks that followed, he became the family's anchor. He took over the school run, a constant, reassuring presence at the school gates. He cooked simple meals, organized play dates to maintain a semblance of normalcy, and kept the household running while the world outside speculated wildly about his wife's condition. He was learning to navigate the terrifying new terrain of helplessness, finding purpose in the small, mundane acts of love that held his family together. He told friends the feeling was heartbreak, fear, and helplessness all at once. But he also told them that his devotion to Catherine never wavered. She was his world, and he would be by her side every step of the way, through the darkness, and he prayed, back into the light. A few years later, the storm had passed, leaving in its wake a landscape forever changed but capable of new growth. Catherine was in remission, her health slowly returning, her spirit unbowed. The experience had forged a new, unbreakable steel in their marriage, a shared understanding of life's fragility that bound them tighter than ever. It was this understanding, this hard-won empathy, that led Prince William to a small kitchen in Cardiff on World Mental Health Day. He was there to meet with Rhian Mannings, the founder of a bereavement charity, a woman whose own story of loss was a testament to the devastating power of grief. The kitchen was warm and homely, the kettle whistling on the hob, the smell of homemade Welsh cakes filling the air. It was a setting designed for comfort, for candid conversation. William sat across the table from Rhian, a cup of tea in front of him. And he was no longer just a prince on an official visit. He was a man who had stared into the abyss of losing his wife, a father who understood the primal terror of his children facing a future without their mother. Rhian began to tell her story. In 2012, she and her husband Paul had suffered the unimaginable, the sudden, unexpected death of their 1-year-old son, George, from a hidden illness. 5 days later, overwhelmed by grief and guilt, Paul had taken his own life. He left behind Rhian and their 2 other children. She spoke of the shock, the silence, the awful stigma that surrounded the word suicide. William listened, his face a mask of concentration, but his eyes betraying the deep well of emotion within. He asked gentle, probing questions, the questions of a man who genuinely wanted to understand. Unfortunately, there's still a lot of stigma around suicide, he said softly. Did you feel that at the time? Rhian nodded, explaining how people simply didn't know what to say, how they shied away from the subject, leaving her isolated in her grief. Then William asked the question that cut to the very heart of it all. He leaned forward slightly, his voice barely a whisper. What would you say to him? He asked. To your husband. If you could see him now. Rhian paused, her own eyes glistening. She looked directly at the prince, her voice thick with a lifetime of longing. There's only ever one thing I would ever say to him if I had time with him, she said. And that would be, why didn't you speak to me? I ask myself that every single day. He's missed out on just so much joy. and we would have been okay. I think that's the hardest thing. We would have been okay. The words hung in the air, simple, devastating, and profoundly human. For a moment, Prince William was no longer the heir to the throne. He was just a man confronted with the raw, lingering aftermath of a preventable tragedy. He blinked, and his eyes filled with tears. He tried to speak, to ask another question, to maintain the professional composure expected of him, but his voice caught in his throat. He looked down at the table, a single tear escaping to trace a path down his cheek. He raised a hand, not to wipe it away, but as if to ward off the overwhelming wave of sorrow. "I'm sorry," he managed to whisper, his voice cracking. He reached his hand across the table, a gesture of pure, unscripted empathy. Rian reached out and touched it, her own expression one of understanding, not of a subject with a royal, but of one human being, comforting another. "No, it's fine," she said gently. "You've got children. It's hard, and you've experienced loss yourself." He took a deep, shuddering breath, composing himself. The mention of his mother, Diana, was unspoken, but hung between them. He knew the unanswered questions that lived with you forever. He knew the pain of wondering what could have been done differently. "There's a lot of unanswered questions that live with you forever, really, don't they?" he said, his voice thick with emotion. It was a moment of such raw, unguarded vulnerability that it felt almost sacred. The prince, the future king, had allowed the world to see not the polished facade, but the man beneath. A man who had learned, through his own searing experiences, that the stiff upper lip was a poor defense against the tidal wave of human grief. His near tears were not a sign of weakness, but of a profound and powerful strength, a testament to a life lived with an open heart, a heart that had been broken and healed, and was now brave enough to break again for the pain of others. In that small kitchen in Cardiff, the man who would be king showed the world the true meaning of leadership. Not invulnerability, but the courage to feel and the compassion to connect.